Hi.
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and assalamu alaikum. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Mehlaqa Samdani. I'm with the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice, an advocacy group that impacts policy and public opinion on issues related to the Middle East and South Asia. This event is also being co-sponsored by MARUF Connecticut, which is a grassroots organization founded in 2024 that strives to educate and mobilize Connecticut's Muslim communities and their allies to proactively engage and raise awareness on critical issues of human rights and democracy. As we approach the US presidential election, which is exactly 2 weeks away, we do so in the shadow of the Palestinian genocide, in which the Israeli government has killed more than 43,000 Palestinians, injured more than 100,000, and displaced almost 2 million people. This genocide was actively enabled and financed by the Biden-Harris administration that has continued to send billions of dollars worth of weapons to Israel. In 2020, 65% of Muslim voters voted for Biden. This year, this support has fallen to 12% among American Muslim voters, according to the Institute for Social and Policy Understanding. Since Harris moved to the top of the ticket, there was some hope that her campaign would be able to win back some of those votes, but her strong alignment with Biden's policies has not resulted in a lot of confidence among Arab and Muslim communities. Within this context, what electoral options do we have as far as our communities are concerned? What is at stake here, and how do we build our collective political power in this moment and beyond? To help us explore these questions, we are joined by three very distinguished guests. First, Dr. Hassan Abdul Salam. He is one of the two founders of the Abandon Harris movement. He is also the executive director of the Civil Rights Alliance for America, the organization that coordinates the Abandon Harris movement. Dr. Abdul Salam has been a professor of strategy, movements, and human rights for 12 years. He has taught courses and presented on genocide, torture, displacement, refugees, and discrimination. He has a PhD in sociology from New York University, as well as 3 law degrees. Next, we have attorney Tahira Amadul Wadud, who is the executive director of CARE Massachusetts with over 16 years of experience in corporate, family, and civil rights law. She served as a commissioner with the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women from 2014 to 2020. More recently, in 2018, she ran for the US Congress in Massachusetts' 1st District, securing 30% of the vote. She was named a top woman of law by Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly, and in 2021 received the prestigious Massachusetts Bar Association Community Service Award. Last but not least, we have Brother Edward Ahmed Mitchell, who is a civil rights attorney and former journalist who serves as the National Deputy Director of CARE, the largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization in the US. Mr. Mitchell has also served as president, vice president, and secretary of the National Association of Muslim Lawyers. He received his law degree from Georgetown University Law Center and served as editor-in-chief of the Georgetown Law Weekly. He is here today to represent the American Muslim Election 2024 Task Force. And I'd like to welcome you all and thank you so much to all our speakers for being here. Before we actually turn to you, I'm just going to quickly give our audience just the structure of tonight's event. So first, for the first half an hour, I'm going to ask our speakers a series of questions. And after that, we will turn it over to the audience to ask their questions. We will encourage you to please submit your questions in the Q&A function, not in the chat function, so that we're able to get to as many as possible. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn to Dr. Hassan Abdul Salam. How are you, sir?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having us. And absolutely, feel free.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Salam. So a few weeks ago, the Abandon Harris campaign endorsed Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party for president. What led the movement to reach this decision, and what are your recommendations for down ballot votes?
So from the moment we began Abandon Biden, now rebranded Abandon Harris, we made clear that our strategy is to push the vice president, previously the president, for their genocide, and then take the blame for their defeat. In so doing, we would buy power and send a signal to the political landscape that you should never have ignored us, and that never again should genocide be on the ballot. And so our fundamental strategy is one of punishing the vice president. And we believe, after extensive research, interviews since February 2024 up until the moment we endorsed, that Jill Stein would be one of the most effective vehicles for achieving and advancing our goals. That she is somebody who's been in this territory. She's taken a lot of hits, courageous. She was arrested. And she believes so strongly that the attacks taking place, the bombardments, the rain of munitions on an innocent people on the verge of disintegration, this to her constitutes genocide. So we believe we have a good messenger, someone who doesn't fear the consequence of attack, and someone who's completely aligned that this administration deserves accountability, a reckoning, and our data shows that with the partnership between Aban Harris and Jill Stein, we would achieve our goals because we're not seeking 100,000, 1,000,000 votes, where we're trying to get our 70,000 votes in Michigan, 10,000 in Wisconsin, 10,000 in Arizona, 10,000 in Georgia, 10,000 in Pennsylvania, in order to swing the states away from the vice president and for it to be forever known that people of conscience walk gently behind the curtain at the ballot box, spoke the truth against the pharaohs in the White House. And so this advances our goal, and we believe Jill Stein is truly an effective messenger for this strategy.
And are you primarily focused, Dr. Abdul Salam, on swing states then? Or
Yes.
is it a...
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. We are largely focused on the swing states. While we have folks, Aban Harris supporters, leaders across the nation, our resources are being completely pulled into the swing states. We're operating in 9 states, including states like Minnesota and Florida that don't appear to be swing states. When we set out our campaign in November, we made a very cautious assessment, trying to be as expansive. And so the states where we're operational, where we have campaign managers and a functioning campaign include Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Florida.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much for that. So, Dr. Abdul Salam, there are also those people who believe that, voting for Jill Stein is almost tantamount to wasting your vote because she will not eventually win. And there are also those like Mehdi Hassan who wonder how a vote for Stein will help Palestinians. Like, how do you respond to that?
And a wasted vote is far more preferable than a vote for genocide. Our campaign is structured around the
Oh, Dr.
idea.
Salam, I think you're freezing up a little bit.
Is it fine currently?
Can everybody else hear Dr. Abdul Salam? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Yes, please go ahead.
Our belief is that every person of conscience should vote against genocide. A vote that's wasted is far preferable than a vote for genocide. We are in a period unimaginable, circumstances that require completely new ways of thinking. Today, when we see the tens of thousands of tons of bombardment on an innocent people, we have truly to face this moral challenge and the call for justice. And so we say very clearly, 4 years under any leader is incomparable to 1 day in Gaza. We believe that we are in a state in which there is no such thing as the lesser evil. As a human rights professor, genocide is considered the greatest crime that human beings can commit to one another. And we see this administration as having committed genocide and the Republican candidate as seeking to finish the job, quote unquote. We have no home, we're orphaned, and when you're this vulnerable, the strategies from which you can draw from, the toolbox from which you can gain inspiration, lead us to the belief that we have no other choice but to clear a signal, to signal to the entire political landscape that we have power. Imagine what would happen if we would reward the vice president after all of these attacks, killings, maiming, munitions, the displacement, the ground operation to the north, the bombardments throughout the region, and potential chaos that will expand as months and months of attacks continue. And so the idea would be that you could do anything. It would tell the Republicans and the Democrats that anything can be done to this group, Muslim Americans and their allies, and they would again come out and vote for you based on the idea that there's a lesser evil. There is no lesser evil. There is no milder genocide. And so what we have is the challenge for us to make a mark, for us to come out and show that we were the deciders of this election, that we came out in droves, as we had in 2020 when we made President Biden the president, and we ensured that the vice president lost, to bring a reckoning to the Democratic Party for a recalibration, a realignment towards policies that are peaceful throughout the world. We can't support any longer the claim that there's a lesser evil when we see the flesh and bodies, the amputated bodies of our children, the bones that we see through their skin, our parents displaced, and words of fury, words unimaginable that we hear, a call that I received before the launch of Abandon Biden in Florida, one of our leaders who called me, I thought it was just purely about the logistics of the launch, and he said to me, "You know what I just learned an hour ago, Brother Hassan?" I said, "What?" He said, "I learned that I just lost 24 members of my family." And when I heard that, I said, no American citizen should ever hear uttered such creative sentences, words strung up together, ineffable. And so we will never support any administration that endorses, contributes, enables genocide. What we have is a victory by showing that we were the ones that deposed a leader who sits atop a superpower, and that we will finally ensure that this genocide and genocide itself in our foreign policy will not again be on the ballot.
Thank you, Dr. Abdus Salam. Your moral clarity is so inspiring for all of us. I don't know whether you were able to answer. I mean, for the Green Party, yes, you're on for Jill Stein, you're absolutely endorsing her. And what about your stance regarding down ballot candidates?
Yes, for down ballot candidates, we feel fundamentally that we have to have pro-ceasefire candidates. We're following Vote for Peace .org, and we believe that candidates in either party that support the end of the genocide, that have taken risks, that believe that we should no longer fund the autocratic regime of Israel, these are the candidates that we must support. We also feel that while we wish to punish the vice president, we're interested in having divided government in order for the president not to have the opportunity to legislate any laws, for gridlock to be in America. And so having a Democratic Congress is in our sights. We hope that we'll have gridlock in government. And as many know, many Democrats at the congressional level are pro-ceasefire. And so the goal is to reach that point where we will end up gaining power, influence, while also ensuring a complete reduction of harm.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Abdus Salam. I'm sure our audience will have so many more questions for you. But for now, I'm going to turn to Sister Tahira Amadul Wadud. So Tahira, as the director of CARE Massachusetts, what changes have you seen over the past year within the Muslim communities sort of engagement with the political process? And how can this particular moment be seized to build political power of the Arab American community, of the Muslim American community?
Well, thank you, Mehlika, for your question. And Dr. Hassan, his sharing was so poignant and so important, and it grounds us in the realities that we are in very, very difficult times as a Muslim community, both in our choices with respect to our political engagement and our experiences directly here as Muslims, where Islamophobia is at an all-time high. And for those of us who have family members who are being traumatized and terrorized and killed in unjust wars. And so I just want to take a moment to center and ground that for a second. I've become so used to just doing the work, right? I've become used to drowning in the calls for help and the overwhelming sense of urgency that the Muslim community is feeling, that it's not often that I get to sit and listen and be reminded of the human toll, both here and abroad, that we are facing and our political decisions therein. Mehlika, do you mind just re-giving me the question so that I can answer more directly?
Of course. So I was just asking, what changes have you seen within the Muslim community's engagement with the political process over the past year in your role as the director of CARE Massachusetts? And how can how can this moment be seized to build political power of our communities?
Yes. So as the executive director of a nonprofit, I also want to disclaim that I'm not here to support a particular candidate or to sway people against a particular candidate. So my job has been to guide the Muslim community that voting is just one piece of activism. And so I do want to answer your question about how we've seen it change. But over the past couple of weeks, our office has been hosting these talks, and the format generally is there's a sheikh or an Islamic scholar who opens by essentially making 3 points: that voting is one piece of your activism, that you are mandated to stand against wrong and enjoin what's right, and that Muslims should use their voice. Generally speaking, that has been the consensus. So we are always grateful to hear that, because sometimes, and I'm in all the chat rooms, all the Muslim chat rooms where people are fighting about what to do. So at least they know from the Islamic perspective that they can and probably should do something. Our local campaign is sort of nicknamed Voting Beyond the Presidency, because we're speaking specifically to those who are apathetic. There are many young people who are just like, I'm not voting, I'm going to sit out. And so we are talking about down ballot races. And in Massachusetts, we have some really interesting ballot questions that should not be ignored. To get back to your question specifically, and I'm happy to parse out any of the many ideas that I just shared, one of the things that happened since October 7th is that the Muslim community became very organized pretty darn quickly to self-advocate. And so at least here in Massachusetts, we have been self-advocating and teaching the community how to self-advocate before our congressional reps, all 9 of them, and our US senators, both of them, and on other levels, state senators and state reps, and on the municipal level with the ceasefire resolutions that started to pop up. How we saw it from our perspective was that this was the opportunity to remind people that if you are going to call your congressman, you best to make sure that you are showing up as a registered active voter. Because one of the things that they weigh, of course, is how likely is this person to influence the outcome of my next election, either with their voice or their vote. And if you are showing up either unregistered or not voting, that makes your call for the ceasefire that we've been doing every day for 300 something days, it makes it just that less strong. It doesn't make it invalid, but boy, are you weak in that ask. And so we have used this opportunity to remind people to cast the ballot. We recognize that it's difficult to be a consistent registered voter. There are at least 2 elections every year. And so just speaking the truth to people that is often inconvenient, takes a lot of time to educate yourself, but something that you must do is how we think that we've been shifting the mindset of the Muslim community into more consistent voting to sort of corroborate their ask for ceasefire or ceasefire resolution or weapons embargo or whatever they're experiencing.
I think that's such an important point, Tahira, because, you know, a lot of people right now, they're so disgusted, right, by everything that's going on, so disillusioned by both parties. But then they also don't know enough about, say, Jill Stein or third-party candidates. Yeah. And they're just like, why should we even vote then? Why can't we just sit this election out? And are, you know, literally not planning to vote. And I feel like that would be a disservice to the process, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, definitely. One of the sheikhs in these talks that we've been given, he said that democracy is akin to shura, the process of decision making, the process of coming together and thinking things through and voting. And the process of shura is important to the Muslim community. And so when you remind people that your vote could be a part of a global decision making exercise, and it could have an outcome regardless of which way you're going. It could have an outcome that you help to shape. We are reminded that sitting out is likely not the option, right? I said to the people in one of our earlier talks, I said, I have to go back before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I spoke the truth, or that I spoke an important message to those in authority. Now, that language is common for Muslims. We know that we are to speak truth to power. And so sometimes casting a vote, pushing your ballot through the machine is that truth to power. Of course, we also know that getting on the phone and calling your representative or tagging them in an Instagram is a form of truth to power, but they all work together. So sitting home, I would suggest, is the cowardly option.
Great. Well, thank you so much for emphasizing that. And you, CARE Massachusetts, and I know CARE chapters around the country, they're providing, you know, information regarding early voting and just to get people to see whether they're registered or not. Is there a website that people can turn to if they need that kind of information?
Yes. So on our website, specific to Massachusetts, on our website, is cairma.org. And we have a very nice voter's guide that people can click, and it brings you to some of the local and national resources that other people may be able to use. But it's also, it contains some inspirational thoughts to encourage people to engage in the process, which is just one spoke in the wheel of activism and speaking truth to power.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tahira. Again, I'm sure questions will come your way during the audience Q&A. I will now turn to Brother Edward Mitchell. Thank you so much for joining us, brother. And so my question to you, I mean, you're actually the Deputy Director of CARE National, but you're here also as part of the American Muslim Election 2024 Task Force. Could you tell our audience, you know, what that task force is, who's a part of it, why CARE decided to join it, and why hasn't the task force endorsed any particular party or person in the upcoming election?
That was a lot. Bismillah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. Pleasure to be with Dr. Hassan and Sister Tahira, my colleague, for this important discussion. So, I'm Edward Achman Mitchell. I'm here tonight in my capacity as a board member with CARE Action, which is not CARE. CARE Action is the 501c4 political organization, an offshoot of CARE. So just to make that clear, because legally CARE, the civil rights group, does not engage in partisan politics, cannot endorse or oppose candidates. So I'm not speaking in my capacity as Deputy Director of CARE, speaking as a board member with CARE Action. Now, as you noted, CARE Action is part of the, now that I got that out of the way, CARE Action is part of the American Muslim 2024 Election Task Force. So that is a coalition of Muslim political organizations that came together early this year, back in, I think, January, or even a little earlier than that, and said, we know 2024 is going to be a critical moment for our community here in America and also abroad, especially in Gaza. And we want to make as united of a decision as we can with one united voice. So we came together, CARE Action, U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations, ICNA Council for Social Justice Action, numerous other organizations, Mass Action, the Muslim American Society Action, and numerous others. And I'll list them when I finish my talk. I'll go to the website and list them all for you, inshallah. Voices of Muslims and others. So we came together and we said, look, we're going to assess what are the different options in the 2024 election, what would be best to achieve our number one goal, which is stopping the genocide in Gaza, either now or in the future. And so led by AJP Action, American Muslims for Palestine, their C4, we literally did a very, very systematic appraisal of the candidates at the time, Biden, Trump, Stein, and West, to see where they stood on the issues, what would be the upside of supporting Biden, what would be the downside of doing it, upside of Trump, downside of Trump, upside of Stein, downside of Stein, et cetera. So we spent months doing this very systematic process. And at the same time, we joined other American Muslims and other Americans in putting pressure on Biden to drop out of the race, because it became very apparent to us that because of his not only his steadfast support for the genocide in Gaza, but just the callousness of it, right? He didn't even bother to put, a lipstick on the pig. He said he didn't know if the Palestinians were telling the truth about the death toll. He was just so utterly shameless in his support. And so there was no way the community was going to support him in significant numbers. No way we could support him. So we put the pressure on for him to drop out. And after his horrible debate performance, that ultimately happened, alhamdulillah. So once that happened, the task force shifted gears. We essentially started our work anew now that Vice President Harris was in the race. And we were hopeful that Vice President Harris would substantively break from President Biden on the issue of Gaza. We already knew that she was, based on her public statements, based on people who are kind of working with her, we kind of knew she was more sympathetic towards Palestinians than President Biden. That was a pretty low bar to clear, given how hostile he was. But we felt there was hope that maybe she might do something significantly different. And initially, she did make some positive moves. She did not preside over Netanyahu's ridiculous warmongering racist speech to Congress. Even when she met with him afterwards, she spoke by herself. She didn't smile in the picture with him. She made a point of noting Palestinian suffering in ways more sympathetic than Biden ever has. She appointed 2 Muslim campaign representatives who are mainstream Muslims who are respected in our community. And when those individuals came under attack from pro-Israel groups, she stood by them. She didn't throw them under the bus. She was considering 2 main vice presidential candidates, Shapiro and Waltz. Mr. Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as you all know, was not only, hostile to Palestinians, because that's pretty common, but he had compared college students protesting the genocide to Klan members of the Klan. As a black man, I'll tell you that's such an evil, ridiculous analogy to make. It's completely unacceptable. He had tried to financially punish Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company founded by Jewish Americans, because they stopped selling their product in only the occupied West Bank, just the occupied West Bank. And for him, that was reason enough to try to punish them using the power of the state. And we found out that he literally had volunteered to serve in the Israeli army back in the 90s and had worked for the Israeli embassy. So he was an absolute non-starter as a vice presidential choice, and she didn't pick him. She picked Tim Walz, who has issues, but he'd been much friendlier to the Muslim community and Palestinian community than Mr. Shapiro. So those were all positive steps in the right direction. We were hopeful that there might be some real change. But after that, things went downhill very quickly. At the DNC, the Harris campaign refused to allow any Palestinian American to speak at all even a Palestinian who would have gotten up there and endorsed her and spoken about Gaza, they would not let that happen at all. That was a huge turning point, because that led us to go, well, wait a minute here. If we can't convince the Harris campaign of the DNC to let a Palestinian speak for 3 measly minutes, even when that person would have endorsed her, do we really have hope that we're going to be able to convince her to radically change policy on Palestine in the White House? So that was a real gut check at that moment. And then the commentary that she would make about it. If you ask Vice President Harris about Gaza, the answer is almost always the same. I can do the answer for you. She starts by saying, well, we have to start with October 7th and the horrible things that happened that day. And she'll recount in detail brutal rapes, mass murder, killing of kids at a concert. She'll talk about October 7th. Then she'll say Israel has the right to defend itself. And she'll say, we would. Then she says how Israel defends itself matters. And she says too many Palestinians have been killed in the third person, like they're victims of a natural disaster. And then she says we need a ceasefire, right? And every time it's the exact same answer. Now, we appreciate the sympathetic comments about Palestinians that she makes at the end of that answer. But the problem is that the end of that answer does not include any explanation of what she is going to do to achieve a ceasefire. Because even President Biden supports a ceasefire. Even President Biden says Palestinians have the right to liberty and self-determination and freedom. Those exact phrases, Biden has said that, right? But she has not differentiated herself in substance. She will not say how she'll achieve a ceasefire. She won't say what she'll do differently. And the most important thing, she won't say that she will even consider imposing an arms embargo on the Israeli government, even though that is what is required by U.S. law. That is what the law very clearly says. If you block U.S. aid and you're an arms recipient, you don't get any more arms. If you use our weapons to harm innocent people, to commit human rights violations, you don't get any more weapons. That's the law. And so she has declined to say she'll do that. In fact, her national security advisor said blatantly, openly, she opposes an arms embargo on Israel. So those factors really took the train off the tracks. We were moving in the right direction, but the DNC speaker controversy, the refusal to even be willing to consider an arms embargo, that pattern of just saying you support a ceasefire without being willing to say what you're going to do it, to achieve it, left us in a position where even though there are many good reasons and reasonable reasons people have made to support Vice President Harris, that Trump will be worse on Gaza, that we've got a chance with her to maybe get more Muslims in there, maybe convince her to change her policy. There's a chance with her. There's not a chance with him. That Trump will crack down on Muslims and Palestinians here at home, not to mention what he'll do to immigrants and democracy and all that stuff. Those are reasonable, fair arguments. Don't question those arguments. But at the end of the day, what we concluded was the following, and now I'm getting to what our position was. Mm-hmm. Every community has a red line. Like every community. It's not just Muslims, right? For those voters who have abortion as their top issue, right? If Kamala Harris converted to Catholicism tomorrow and said, you know what? I no longer support reinstating Roe v. Wade. You know, I support letting states do what they want, right? Or I'm gonna say we're gonna have a national abortion rule saying abortion's only allowed up to 15 weeks, right? Even if Trump said he's going to pursue a policy on abortion that's stricter than hers, she would still lose supporters because for them, that is their fundamental red line, is from their perspective, abortion rights, expansive abortion rights, right? Social Security, Medicare. If she said, you know what, we got to make some cuts to it, maybe not as drastic as cuts as the Republicans will make, but we got to make some cuts, she would lose voters because that is their red line. Our community's red line, for most of us, just happens to be genocide. As a matter of principle, we could not endorse a candidate who has participated in a genocide and then refused to lay out any plan to end the genocide, right? Right. So for us, it was not possible to endorse Vice President Harris. In terms of Trump, I don't need to explain why that wasn't going to happen. We were not and did not endorse any particular third-party candidate. I want to make that very, very clear. We did not endorse Jill Stein. We did not endorse Cornel West. We did not endorse Chase Olive. What we said was we want our community to vote based on a principle. You should go out and vote for any presidential candidate who supports a permanent ceasefire and the legally required arms embargo on the Israeli government. Anyone who supports those two policies, go for it. Take your pick of those options. So the only people who have taken that position now are the third-party candidates. So by default, they're the only options from our perspective. Now, if Kamala Harris tomorrow changes her mind and says, I support an arms embargo, well, suddenly she would be eligible. She would meet the standard, right? But that's not her position. So that's where we are. I'll pause now because I've gone on for a bit. I know I didn't answer all your questions, but I'll answer follow-ups if you have them, inshallah.
And so this also, the principle that you just outlined also applies to all the down ballot candidates, right? So that is how people should be voting, how people, running for congressional seats, if they have called for a ceasefire, if they have called for an arms embargo, is that what your position is, or is that only for at the presidential level?
So very briefly, I'll say that down ballot races, many of them have nothing to do with foreign policy and nothing to do with Gaza at all, right? So our position is support candidates up and down the ballot who support just policies overall. No one's perfect, right? You have candidates on the right or left who support bad things, but look up and down the ballot, turn out to vote no matter what. If you're voting for Harris, whoever, turn out to vote. Make your voice heard, number one. Make your voice heard. Number two, president, arms embargo, ceasefire. For any positions that have an influence over foreign policy, like members of Congress, same thing applies. Ceasefire, arms embargo. Now, for other races that have nothing to do with Gaza, well, then that may not be a litmus test because a city council person may not need to take a position on the issue of Gaza at all, right? But you still should go out and vote for the best person for that race. So yes, it applies down the ballot to the extent that it's relevant to that race.
Sure. Okay. So just briefly now, and I'm going to ask this question of all three of us speakers because we do want to turn it to the audience as well. There's some in the Muslim community, such as those who were in the uncommitted movement, who actually led the uncommitted movement, who have not endorsed any candidate, but are actively campaigning against Trump and are also not recommending voting for third parties. They believe that organizing under Harris would be easier than organizing under the Trump administration, and especially when it comes to Palestinian rights. How would you all respond to that? So briefly, Brother Mitchell, and then I'll turn to Dr. Abdul Salam and also Tahira for some brief responses to that, please.
I've been talking a lot. Let me defer to my colleagues here, then I'll go in.
Okay. Dr. Abdul Salam, would you like to respond?
Oh, we believe that doing so, simply saying as the uncommitted and leaders and uncommitted that you cannot vote for a third party whilst also not endorsing Harris. The question for them is it Harris or is it not Harris? We believe that that's a forfeiture of one's leverage, that where we get power in politics is when you're a credible threat and you can withdraw your support when your demands, your conditions aren't met. And so we feel that we have to be uncompromising when it comes to life and justice, when it comes to genocide. And so we have made it clear that we are supporting a third-party candidate here, Jill Stein, as a means of demonstrating our power and our influence, something that is so critical, and why coming out and voting this year is essential, so that we are known as having voiced our position, and a consequence emerged, accountability, and a reckoning on the part that we supported for over 2 decades.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abdul Salam. Tahira, would you like to go next?
Oh, I think I probably don't have anything extra to add to that segment of the conversation.
Sure. Great. Thank you. Brother Mitchell, would you like to say a few words about this, or should we go to the audience?
So I'll briefly say that, look, one of the things that we emphasized in our task force statement, which I just put in the chat, is that people are going to reasonably disagree about what to do in 2024. There are reasonable arguments to vote for Jill Stein. There are reasonable arguments to vote for Harris. I've even heard some crazy arguments that kind of halfway make sense for voting for Trump. I don't agree with it, but I've heard the arguments, right? So we respect the difference of opinion in the community, and we don't want to badmouth or criticize anyone who is trying to end this genocide just because they have a different tactic than us. Having said that, at some point your position has to make sense, right? And so I think some groups are trying to thread the needle. They do not want to actively make Kamala Harris lose by endorsing a third-party candidate, but at the same time they can't bring themselves to affirmatively support her. And so they've staked out this kind of middle ground of, look, vote your conscience, but just keep in mind Trump is bad and we can't allow him to get back in office, right? So they're kind of leaving it to the voter to figure out what they mean by that. And that's a position they can take. I think for the task force, we felt we needed to give a very specific guidance, right? We weren't willing to endorse a third-party candidate because each of them has flaws and limitations, and the community has different views about who they want to support, but we did want to endorse the principle. And so that's why we did what we did. We understand why Uncommitted did what they did, respect the difference of opinion, but we felt the community needed some clear guidance. If not a candidate to support, at least the positions that would allow them to support a candidate.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So guys, now we're going to turn it over to the audience, and the audience has submitted their questions. Veena, would you like to sort of enter the room? Thank you. And maybe ask the first question, please.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. The first question is, if I voted by mail-in ballot, would I still be able to vote in November? So I'm not sure if this question means that they've already voted as an absentee or not. So this is a little bit confusing, but I would say if you've already voted, you won't be able to vote again to go in person. And
Yeah.
please
And then
comment
on
again
Fox
if that's
News
wrong.
as an example of the mythical double voter. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. So we don't want that. There are a couple of questions about a Trump administration. So how do you see the situation in Palestine changing if Trump is in the White House? And then also around what will be the strategy once if Trump wins the White House and sides with Israel?
I'll briefly comment on that. So, Bismillah. So Muslim leaders have already been holding meetings to game out how to respond if Vice President Harris wins or if Donald Trump wins. So those conversations are already happening, and we already have a bit of a detailed plan that has been laid out. And so those conversations will continue, inshallah. What I will say briefly is that there is a very clear and distinct risk that Donald Trump will be even worse on the issue of Gaza. It's very clear Netanyahu wants him to win the election. The Israeli public wants him to win the election. He is being funded by Miriam Adelson, who has called on him to support the annexation of the West Bank and letting Israel do what it wants in Gaza. So there absolutely is a risk that he will be worse. There's also the possibility that, number one, because of his general anti-war streak, that he might be hesitant to letting things continue to spin out of control in the Middle East. There's also the possibility that it'll be easier to organize against him, because right now we're organizing against Biden and Harris and the entire Democratic Party that wants to protect their leader, right? Because it's just, that kind of groupthink mentality, rally around the flag. If Trump is the one enabling a genocide, maybe it becomes easier for our friends on the left to stand with us in opposing the genocide and putting pressure on it to end. So there's a possibility that things could get even worse. There's a possibility that we might be surprised. The one real risk that I'm worried about here domestically is the fact that Trump is surrounded by some people who are extreme Islamophobes, including Laura Loomer, who would love to try to target and silence Muslims and Palestinians in this country, right? I don't think Kamala Harris will do that. I do think there's a real risk the Trump administration would try to weaponize the Justice Department to target and shut down organizations that advocate for Palestinian human rights. So that's something we have to be ready for to fight against if they decide to go down that route.
Sure. Vena, do you want to ask the next question?
My apologies. The next question is from our dear sister Sarwat. So can any of the panelists also speak to the strategy that in blue states, anyone who normally would have voted blue is on the fence, can vote their conscience, as Vice President Harris will probably win in these states anyway, but they can vote for pro-peace and pro-Palestinian candidate, Dr. Stein, and these votes go towards the possibility of the 5% vote for the Green Party, which opens up the ballot lines, it opens up federal funding, and forcing a debate to include the Green Party presidential candidate that hopefully by that time will be Butch Ware.
Who would like to take that question?
Yeah.
Well, if no one's
As someone,
go ahead, Tyler.
I was just going to say, as someone who lives in a blue state, I would say that is a conversation I'm seeing a lot among a lot of Muslims. But again, there's no consensus, but it is a thought that we're hearing a lot.
Right. And sort of just going along with that, Dr. Abdul Salam, I'm also wondering, is your vote for Dr. Jill Stein is this primarily for just this moment, Or beyond this election, are you also trying to support the party so as to end the duopoly and give this third party a chance, which does align with a lot of our values? So is this going to go beyond, is that kind of organizing going to continue after the election as well?
At Abandon-Harris, our primary motivation is to ensure that we punish the vice president for her genocide. In other words, we're deploying the Green Party as a strategic vehicle to advance our goals. Our goal is to make Jill Stein the candidate by which we can follow into November 5th. The notion that we want to expand the Green Party, ensure that we reach 5%, all of these are secondary, while they're, cherry, at the top of one's ice cream. They're not the primary goal. Our primary goal is to punish. We believe that we can do so with a very small number of voters. We're seeing in our aggregate polling and our data in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, as well as Pennsylvania, we're seeing +0, +0.4%, +0.3% difference between the two top candidates. And so we know that Muslim Americans will be the deciders. The Green Party provides us an opportunity to achieve this goal while also standing behind someone who is with us on principle, who has been speaking out, speaking truthfully against the genocide, and someone who then will demonstrate iconically what we believe we wish to have, the hope for the future of America. But ultimately, we are deploying the Green Party as a means to capture the Democrats, to have a reckoning, for them to become more pro-Palestinian in their policies, pro-peace, pro-justice. Remember, it's not just Palestine where we find vicious, pernicious policies from the United States all around the world. And so we're using this as a mobilization to protect the Ummah, as well as many parts of the world, Latin America, other parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, where American foreign policy has been detrimental to the people. And this is our primary objective, while also creating a reckoning in the Democratic Party, a reorientation for the Republicans. When they see that we're influential, that we came through, that we were the deciders, they too would limit their evil policies that they have pursued in the last 20 years, particularly their Islamophobia domestically, as well as the foreign policy, which they share similarities with the Democratic Party, often obstructing the best wishes and hopes for people all around the world, all around the world.
Great, thank you. Vina, do you want to go next?
Yes, this question is about voting for Jill Stein, and it says this will definitely give Trump the White House. I guess there was a letter by the Council of Ulama that endorsed the Republican Party. Will Trump be better at foreign policy in favor of Palestinians and Lebanon if he is in office?
We kind of sort of answered that question as well. Who would like to take that?
I think I kind of addressed that earlier, which is that it's possible he could be much worse. There's some people think there's possible he could be less worse, or that it might be easier for us to organize against him versus a Harris or Biden supporting the same policy. So same answer applies. He does have, I would just note that there is a prominent Lebanese American billionaire who is his brother-in-law. He's the father-in-law of his daughter. And so he is supporting President Trump, and he is trying to convince people that Trump will be different in the Middle East to support peace. And obviously most community members are not buying that, but he is making that claim. So
yes, that billionaire's son is married to Tiffany Trump. So he's been trying to galvanize a lot of, or trying to pull away the 100,000 from that, voted uncommitted in Michigan to sort of move towards Trump. And there was a huge article in the Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, about that, about the Arab support for Trump as well. Some of, a very small segment of it. But guys, I was also wondering, and anybody can really answer this question, CARE actually conducted a poll recently which showed that among Muslim and Arab voters, Jill Stein was polling better than Kamala Harris in three key swing states, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Michigan. Nationally, however, a recent poll showed that contrary to popular belief, Jill Stein might be taking votes away from Trump. Since Stein might be considered a spoiler by both the Democrats and Republicans, I'm wondering if you believe that the Muslim and Arab communities will bear the brunt of attacks from the losing party come November. Tahir, do you want to sort of talk a little bit about that, or whoever wants to answer? I mean, what are we opening our, yes, we're all trying to vote on principle and vote our conscience, but what will be the consequences for Arabs and Muslims here in this country?
I'd be curious to what Dr. Hassan says about, since he has endorsed Jill Stein, I'd be curious to what his perspective is on that.
Yeah, and the term spoiler, in fact, what we are doing is taking this moment as a moment of reckoning and accountability. In October, we issued an ultimatum to the president, someone who we voted for in droves in 2020, and we gave him an opportunity to call for a ceasefire. When he didn't, we then vowed to actively campaign against him. The same thing we did in July, provided an opportunity for the vice president to come and say, in my heart, I always felt this was a genocide. I do not follow the president in my policies if I begin January 20th as the president of the United States. The media took our request to meet with the vice president, and the vice president campaign said, no, they will not. Our only two demands was a full arms embargo and a permanent ceasefire. And we believe that Jill Stein acts as an opportunity for us to have accountability. You ignored us again and again and again as we protested across the country for months. And now is your time to experience the consequence of the policy you have inflicted on an innocent people. And so when she asked, and she said clearly to the protesters in Detroit, I'm speaking, Madam Vice President, when will the people of Gaza speak? When will Muslim Americans speak? On November 5th, we will have this moment, a moment of accountability for all the nation to learn, a story that wasn't told this past year, that the Democrats could have won, but they risked this country, our government, because of what? Genocide. Genocide was something the vast majority of Democrats are against, and overwhelmingly have sought a ceasefire. And so for what? The hope is that a transformation happens at least in one of the two major parties. And so we do not stand behind Stein on the assumption that the Green Party will enter the White House, that the Green Party will suddenly become the new second party or the largest or one of the two large parties in the next few years, but rather an opportunity to show what we believe the Democratic Party should look like, what we believe the Republicans should hear, an opportunity for us to exercise our influence and to be the dividers, those who are powerful, those who have been shunned and now must be heard.
Thank you. I think that's such an important point to raise, that it would not be it would not be in their interest, in the Democrats' interest, to blame any one community for having lost the election, but that they would only have themselves to blame for their policies and what this led to. So thank you for that. Vina, you had the next question?
Yes, this is a question that goes out to Brother Edward. You have had many conversations with inner circles of the Harris campaign. Do you get any sense at all that once elected, if elected, Harris may have more room to go against the Jewish lobby and make some pro-Palestinian decisions?
I think the Israeli lobby is what perhaps we would need to say.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I actually, I number one referred to it as the anti-Palestinian lobby. And to be clear, it encompasses various communities. So, you know, some of the people who are most ardently anti-Palestinian are far-right Christians in America, who believe that as part of their end of times thought that the Jewish community must all gather in Israel so that Jesus, peace upon him, will come back, and then they will all be forced to convert to Christianity or die. So it's, you know, it's a lot. But that leads them to very strongly press our policymakers in America to support the Israeli government. And then, of course, you have some people who support Israel for other reasons. But I just want to note that some of the people who have been most vocal in opposing the genocide and standing up for Palestinians have been Jewish Americans, right? I've seen probably as many Jewish kids getting arrested at protests as I've seen Muslim kids. Often the Jewish kids will be on the front lines, getting beaten up, and using their privilege to speak up. So I just want to say that and express my appreciation to them. To the question. So, you know, what I would say is that the Harris campaign appointed 2 mainstream members of the Muslim community as their liaisons. And I think everyone who has interacted with them publicly or privately, or who has known them in the past, says that these individuals are respected, respectful members of our community. These are people who recognize the humanity of all individuals, including Palestinians. And that is a positive sign that they are there as part of the campaign, and they weren't thrown under the bus. But any campaign liaison is limited to what the campaign decides to do, right? So at the end of the day, Vice President Harris and her top advisors are the ones who are going to be controlling the substance of what the campaign stands for. Liaisons are there to, you know, send the messages back and forth, right? What the community wants, what the campaign says. And of course, we would hope that the liaisons are expressing the concerns of the community to the campaign. I have no doubt they've been doing that. But it's not on them, it's on the campaign to make a change. And so all I can say is we will see if the campaign decides to make some last minute change. You can see them trying to slightly adjust their language now, maybe because they see the polls. This administration, the Biden administration, has a really horrible habit of 6 months later realizing what the right thing to do is, right? When we first all called for a ceasefire back in October because we knew what the Israeli government was about to do, we were dismissed as crazy. You're anti-Semitic, you support terrorism, blah, blah, blah. It took 20,000 people being killed for them to go, oh, okay, maybe there should be a ceasefire, right? And so they're always late to the game, including now, it seems, in recognizing that there is a real risk they're going to lose key swing states because of how upset Black people, young people, Muslim voters, Arab Americans are about the genocide. So that's all I would say about that.
Great, thank you. So do we have time for one more question, speakers? I know we're coming up to 8 o'clock. Yeah, one more. Okay, great. Thank you. So, and just as a follow-up, and anybody can answer this, you know, as you know, we had sort of listed some of the principles that we want people to vote on, but getting a lot of funding from AIPAC, for instance, is that something that can discredit a candidate in your mind? And just because I know this is the last question, so I'm just going to tag another one onto that as well. And that is that, you know, if Muslims and Arabs sort of end up voting as a bloc for Jill Stein, do you believe that post-election, the 2 mainstream parties, do you think they're going to take them more seriously, or will both parties then dismiss them as somebody who, you know, as people who were disloyal, who were not, you know, completely, you know, willing to support them at this point 4 years from now? Like which way will this go, do you think? So again, AIPAC was the first part of the question, and completely unrelated was the other question about, will we be taken more seriously, or will we be dismissed 4 years from now because of if we all say vote for third parties? Who wants to take the AIPAC question?
So okay, Bismillah. So AIPAC, you know, is still, it used to be completely bipartisan, meaning that it had, you know, extreme influence over both parties. Now it's a much more partisan issue because they moved so far. They always have been, right, but it's so obvious how anti-Palestinian they are, how racist they are, how warmongering they are. They run some really horrific ads against Muslim members of Congress. So they are much more divisive now, and so they are much more comfortable in the Republican Party, and many Democrats shun them. Many Democrats don't. And so I think we need to build power to the point that number one, AIPAC is radioactive to everyone, especially in the Democratic Party, right? That they are a racist, warmongering organization. They should register as a foreign agent. And so we want to make sure people know that's not an unacceptable group to be working with. We haven't built that political power yet. And we have to do that, right? To the other question you had was what's the second question?
Are we going to be dismissed because we voted?
Right. Well, look, if Vice President Harris loses, regardless of whether she wins the election, let's say she loses the state of Michigan, and the exit polls clearly indicate that Muslim Arab voters had a major role to play in that, if the Democratic Party is smart, that will make them go, oh, we better not support a genocide again. We need to listen to these voters. Even if they win the election by winning Georgia or North Carolina, the fact that they lost Michigan because of that issue of Gaza would still be a huge thing. And if they lose the whole election because of Gaza, again, the intelligent thing to do would be to go, oh, we should not support genocide and we should listen to these voters. But I fear what they might actually do is become defensive, blame our community for it, and just become hostile instead of learning the lesson. So if that is what happens, and I'm not saying I hope that's what happens, I don't, but if that is what happens, then we will have to be ready to push back and say, this is not on us. This is on you. We gave Vice President Harris and Joe Biden and the Democratic Party every chance in the world to just say you'll uphold the law by limiting weapons, suspending weapons in Israel and its genocide. That was our request. You didn't do it. What happens is on you. It's not on us.
Right, very clear. Thank you, Brother Edward. Dr. Abdul Salam, would you like to respond, or Tahira?
Oh, that was stated quite eloquently by Brother Edward. I completely agree.
Tahira? Wonderful. Thank you so much, Veena. I'm going to turn this over to you.
Yes, so this concludes our program for tonight. And mashallah, thank you all for being here. On behalf of the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice and MARUF CT, I would like to extend our thanks to our esteemed speakers once again, Dr. Hassan Abdul Salim, Attorney Tahira Amatul Wadud, and Attorney Edward Mitchell for sharing your extremely beneficial information with us. Thank you, everybody who joined. I know in Connecticut, early voting has started. It started in many states, so please go out and vote. This is not the year to stay home. There's one thing that Dr. Hassan had said earlier that really hit me. We were talking about the lesser of two evils, and he said, there is no milder genocide. That really hit me, and there's nothing truer than that statement right now. So please, everybody, go out and vote. Thank you, everybody, and good night. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa
Thank you all.
alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Hassan, Tahira, good to see you both. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.